difference between the Western and the Indian way of approaching the history of racial violence, cultural annihilation, and erasure of civilization. The Americans were generous enough to preserve the literatures and ruins of the Incas, the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Native Americans in a number of museums. But the self-proclaimed liberal and tolerant Indian culture had spread not even that much space for the Asus. They existed only as vestiges of myth. This eye-opening comparison between the American and the Indian way of responding to the histories of massacres and preserving the cultures of exterminated communities certainly insists on the temperament of the concerned mainstream civilization in power. The final 3 chapters of the novel show successive deaths of tribal people of the Asur community, all planned and implemented after the desire of the lords of the global village, in the case of the novel, the multinational companies. They know well that they were the nation state, and therefore its resources belong only to them. Naturally, when they see the long-cloth Ashur, Bidija, Uran, and Munda tribals, Dalits and Sadans around the mineral resources and the jungles, they get irritated and grow impatient to exterminate the insects to begin Operation Mohapatra. I believe the learned audience could relate this particular phrase to exterminate the insects with the contrarian hello of exterminate the brutes version in Heart Diamonds. So, yes. Let me finish. The liminal subject position of the tribal Asur people is not their vulnerability, but adds to the glorious past of tribal cultural identity in relation to their emancipatory struggle for freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Day. You still had 1 more minute, but then I'm extremely happy. Now I invite Sharana and her student Sparsa to make their presentation. And since Sharana was my student, I will be a little schoolmaster. Okay. So, Sharana, 12 minutes.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. Am I audible? So, respected dignitaries on the desk and on the desk. So, the title of our paper is Projecting to Mainstream, Reclaiming the Margin, Reconstructing History, a study of G. Kalyani Rao's unprejudiced spring and alternative Dalit literary historical theory. Now, what we are trying to understand here in this paper and what we're trying to do in this paper is what kind of history we talk about when we look at Dalit history, because we do not have any historical signpost. So, for Dalits to call it as their own history, what kind of historical methods and historiographical methods should we apply to look for Dalit history in a history, in a nationalist historiography, where they are just, they have been completely written out and forgotten. So that is primarily something that we are doing, and we are arguing that Dalit literature can be a source of history for Dalits, right? In the sense that we are contesting the very traditional idea of writing history or a traditional idea of historiography where time is always prevalent. What we are looking at here is how we can shift away from the idea of the time and chronology, and rather we can look at the idea of space and contingencies, and as envisaged by Foucault in his methodology called genealogy, and that we look in Dalit literature in their everyday situatedness. So that is the argument we are going to make in this paper. I'll start with a little bit of note towards the definition of history and historiography. History as a regimen of social sciences has decamped through a phase of passionate self-reflexivity on account of the epistemological terms like post-colonialism, post-structuralism, and postmodernism. Historiography is the history of history. It concerns itself with how knowledge of the past is obtained In other words, historiography examines the writing of history and historical methods, drawing upon authorship, sources, interpretation, style, prejudices, and readership. Historiography allowed for the possibility of the processes by which history as an absolute archive of the past grows into conscious construction of people's stories and a concurrent analysis concerning the very process of assembling histories. Issues engaged by critical historiography include what constitutes a historical event, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about when we analyze the novel, Dalit novel. I mean, let us understand all those my fellow presenters. They talked about tribalism, they talked about tribal consciousness and all. However, all of them have been negotiated or presented by the Savarna writers. Like this is what was confessed by Mahashweta Devi, that she understands the danger of representation. Now here we are talking about self-representation. G. Kalyana Rao himself is a Dalit who has tried to give voice or words to his own experience. So through the archive of transgenerational hunting and intergenerational memory. So this is what we are arguing here. So then history in the Western philosophical trajectory tends to be a totalizing homogeneous record of the past, erasing the experience of alternative accounts and otherness. However, since the Second World War, continental philosophers from those belonging to the Frankfurt School to Foucault have been critiquing this model of historiography. Foucault, for instance, talks about genealogy in many of his work after he moved away from historical analysis to archaeology, and then finally he moved to genealogy as a method to show that factual processes and practices are not logical and continuous but heterogeneous with jolt, surprises and chance incidents. Foucauldian genealogy de-authorizes the authority of time and chronology in understanding history and proposes for space and contingencies. This helps to overcome the epistemological gap between written history and memory. This emphasis on space for interpreting history is enabling in rethinking history in the context of coping with contingencies. Now, survival studies in India, or let's say South Asia, is one such example of such historiography. This project, with Ranajit Guha as its chief architect and with its claim to rejection of nationalist approach to historiography and privileging of the category of the subaltern in terms of class, caste, gender, signals a paradigm shift toward a discursivity and contingency of the category designated as the nation. So we can say, to quote Hausbaum and E.P. Thompson, that subaltern study in its more reflexive moment does history from the below. As Dipesh Chakrabarty has pointed out, it challenges the mainstream historiographical practices by attempting to impute hitherto-omitted narratives of the oppressed and the despoiled. So then can we apply subaltern studies model for Dalit experience and to write a history of Dalits? We say that is also an insufficient model to a certain extent, because the Indian historiographies of the pre-colonial, colonial and post-colonial period have been silent about the Dalits of the Hindu social structure. As Ranajit Guha himself, in his introduction to the subaltern studies, has stated, and I quote, "History of the Indian nationalism has been written up as a sort of spiritual biography of the Indian elite, from Ram Mohan Roy to Dayanand and from Gandhi to Nehru. Such history for a long time omitted the contribution of Dalit leaders and social reformers like Jyotiba Phule, Narayan Guru, Periyar, because of their caste identity. The upper caste removal of Dalits from history stages the central problematic of Dalit literature. The notions of history and historicity theorized by Dalit writers and critics differ significantly from the Savarna critics. Dalit literature bears little sense of triumphant nationalism or prevalent modernity despite being post-colonial. As the Dalit philosopher Gopal Guru writes, Dalits are still in search of an inclusive civilization that would ensure them at least a sense of decent time and space. And therefore, Dalit literature, Raj and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's well-known critique of Gandhi and Nehru and the nationalists as constitutively upper caste. It is also not quintessentially subaltern, which levels a strident critique at traditionalist, leftist and Marxist approaches and their putative conflation of caste and class. And that is why Kancha Ilaya, the Dalit scholar, said, if history of Dalit Dalits is a history of white pages, then Dalit literature can be broadly read as a corrective to the history, a history of upper caste religion and fabrication and quote. So, from its inception, Dalit literature therefore concerns itself in bringing a revolution in literary domain through the rejection of the established notion of literary and the aesthetics and the reconstruction of Dalit history, foreground Dalit experience and Dalit subjectivity. So now let us look at the novel Untouchable Spring by G. Kalyani Rao, how it can be read as an alternative Dalit historiography. Alavi Uma and M. Sridhar in their translator's note called Touch. So the title of the novel, name of the novel is Untouchable Spring, and they have written a translator's note titling it as Touch the Spring, an introspection, where they have asked this question: what happens when a Dalit community pushed into the margins of mainstream history suffices to tell its stories by inventing an in-between genre that simultaneously interrogates objective histories and self-driven autobiographies? So we argue that G. Kalyani Rao's Telugu novel Antarani Vasantam, translated into English as Untouchable Spring by Alavi Uma and Sridhar, is an answer to that particular question. It is an epic tale about the lived experience of the untouchables of India in general and Dalits of Andhra Pradesh in particular. The text explores the uncharted territory of Dalit lives of the 5 generations of Dalit. I'm reminding you, it's about 5 generations of Dalits of Yenala Dili and their struggle against social discrimination, cultural hegemony, economic exploitation, and political marginalization during different historical periods. And in the course of history, though their modes of resistance and aggression have changed from conversion to armed rebellion, but the fact that they are still treated as the others of Hindu society and judged by the caste has remained unchanged. Untouchable Spring is an alternative historiography in various ways. It contests several prevailing tendencies of literature and historiography, such as the rejection of the written modes of history, unlearning of the nationalist historiography, and I just quickly give you a few examples how the text is doing it. For example, Ruth, the Dalit narrator, dives deep into the collective memory of her untouchable ancestor to recover and reconstruct her identity, and she asked this question: how Telugu literature, for example, is really cruel to Dalit artists. She asked this question. These blessed jurists who search for Telugu drama behind European curtains cannot find drama in the rhythmic feat of Yelana, the Dalits acting and dance. It is not visible, that's all. Do you mean to say that there is dance in the mere jumping of the Malas and the Madigas? And that is why she asked this question. To take a step, let's put there, pull it very gently and turn round with ease. If you combine both with drum, that is what they call drama. And that is the crowning moment of acting in the creation of great sages, Bharata, where there lies the entire secret. Here, Ruth, the Dalit narrator, questioned the so-called authenticity of written histories because it is through the process of selective appropriateness and erasure and reinscription that particular version of the past has been created and circulated. This has gone too much into the making of an identity of the people who have not experienced untouchability in their lived experience. It is absolutely necessary to ask what happens to history in this context. She exposes how history is imaginatively recreated through the manipulation by the makers of history.
To the suffering of the Dalits over centuries, their everyday fight for survival, their struggle against caste oppressions, and the final word through armed struggle for equality comprise enough matter for an epic. Ask the translators. Kalyani Rao seems to say yes emphatically in Untouchable Spring. If author Miller subverted the meaning of tragedy in his death of salesman and instead that the failure of an ordinary man is fit enough material for tragedy, Kalyani Rao does this with reference to the epic, using 18 chapters of his text, which cannot but reminds us of 18 purposes of Mahabharata. He is obviously romanticizing the heroine in the Dalit struggle for emancipation from untouchability, who is to decide whether only the travel of the Pandavas in the Mahabharata is an epic journey, who can say that their request for a minimal 5 villages along with honorable, who can say that the Gurucharan war alone is just a war. Why is war justified in one context and not in another? Thank you.
So, thank you very much. This is the most unpleasant duty that I have ever had to perform. I know that I am not a favorite person with the panelists now, but we have 5 minutes. We will take questions, preferably for one for each presenter. Yeah, please make it quick. Yagra.
Thank you, sir. My question is to Jarna. I read Untouchable by Munkraj. I also read Behera by Akhil Naik, which is also translated by Professor Rajkumar. Now, my question, a specific question would be, like when a Dalit writes his own story and a non-Dalit translates it, how does the authenticity you talk about percolate in the translation? Does the translation take the same kind of sense that Kafka said that the book should be something that should act as an X for the frequency in us? Do you think a non-Dalit translator translating a Dalit original writing does justice to the text itself?
I'm reminded of this very same question which I asked to Rajkumar sir. Right? He translated Veda, and I said, like, what about the question of translating caste? He was talking about it, and then I probably will give the same answer. Now I am reminded of another question which my supervisor asked me when I was working on feminism and feminist first. And he said that can men be feminist? Right? This is the question he asked. Like, can men write about it? See, whereas experiential realities is one thing that we cannot just negotiate, right? And that is something that somehow talks about the authenticity of the text, like which of course we are contesting. The very idea of authenticity we are contesting, but experiential reality, lived experience that we call it. Now we are talking about a corpus of literature where we do not have many translators coming from the same background to talk about it. Now, one of the reasons we are translating it also, and Anadi, Uma and Sridhar are categorically pointing out in translating that we are very much aware that we do not belong to that class. Does that mean we should not translate? Does that mean we should not carry it forward to the larger audience who must read it first to be able to critique it or to be able to take it, as a research question like you asked me. So that's the first step, and therefore we must not hesitate from translating it, right? Then of course we can go, then of course we have different people coming, scholars coming and asking this question, but what if it is never translated at all? So of course the idea of self-food, the idea of lived experience and experiential reality, these things are very, very important. But when we're talking also about a marginalized literature, let's just bring it to mainstream. Let us start that initiative to bring it to mainstream first, right? That's the first question we must deal with, right? Thank you very much.
Is there any other question? Quick question for either Dr. Day or Professor Behera?
Authenticity and inauthenticity. So you are looking at Mahadev and Mahasadavi are two non-tribal writers writing about the tribal people. So there is the question of authenticity. There are writers like Bama and writers like Narayan, Alaram literature. They belong to Dalit community, but these two belong to Dalit. But authenticity, anything authentic, is also a construction. That has to be put in a structure, language, words. So that way, that nothing called authentic or authenticity also, authentic is also discussed by other elements. So the beauty of authenticity is lost. So when put into structure, when you put into structure, the authenticity is also he also compromised to a great extent. That I can respond that. So you may ask the same question to about Gurucharan Martin and Mahasita Devi.
A very quick question, 1 minute. Please. Make it quick. Please introduce yourself.
Myself Kishore from Vasundhara Information Media. We are working on this tribal culture and that language. So my question is, sir, Mr. Dev, so as you said that missionaries are highly influenced on means tribals language and their culture actually when they are producing some of the means work. Okay, just may I know that it is just manipulated by transmitting. Okay, that or is it that they are producing the authentic means culture?
Thank you, Mr. Kishore, for your question and make my paper set into communication. If I have understood you properly, I mean your question, then you are asking me about the missionary and tribal relationship here in the part of. I'm not specific about it. There are the second time visited here. But as I'm researching over this broad area of Chotanagpur Plateau, yes, the answer to your question is precisely yes. And that happened since the colonial period, yes, in the middle of 19th century. If I have the honor to refer to the Honorable President of India right now, she belongs to a tribal community, one of the major tribal communities of India. And everyone knows that the language of Santali has been written in court, in Alchiki court by Pandit Ratnath Murmu. But further research shows that the basic format of that code, which we call Alchiki, was primarily invented by a Norwegian missionary in the 1890s whose name is Paul Olaf Boring. And all his research works and his diaries are kept as microfilms in the University of Oslo in Norway right now. Unfortunately, we don't have it in India for further research. But it makes it very clear that somehow communities like the Santans, the Munda, even to some extent the Loda community, who were announced by the British government as a criminalized tribe, they were later influenced by the missionary activity. Am I clear to your question?
Okay, so I now conclude the session and I request my Maitreyi and Pankar to please set up the system for the online presentation. It will take about 10 minutes. So meanwhile you can quickly go and grab a cup of coffee or tea, sorry, not coffee, tea. But please come back inside in 10 minutes. Please come back inside. Thank you.
So please come.
Zero session, not mine.
Come here and just
Maro.